Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with Dr. Laura Freid, the president of Maine College of Art and Design and a leader in arts advocacy. Applications to MECA BFA program increased by 53% from 2016 to 2019, accompanied by a 24% increase in selectivity and a 7% increase in the diversity of the incoming class. The MFA program more than doubled from 17 to 38 students in the same timeframe. Previously, Dr. Freid served as CEO and executive director of Silkroad for more than a decade. She also served as executive producer of the internationally acclaimed feature documentary, The Music of Strangers, Yo-Yo Ma, and the Silk Road Ensemble. Prior to joining Silkroad, Dr. Freid was executive vice president for public affairs and university relations at Brown University, a magazine journalist and editor. She previously served as publisher of Harvard Magazine and executive director of the Ivy League Publishing Group. Before working at Harvard, she was the publisher and editor of Bostonia magazine for 10 years. Our interview today is sponsored by Maine Home Design. Don't miss Dr. Freid's design theory in the upcoming September issue of Maine Home Design. Thank you for coming into the studio today, Dr. Laura Freid. Welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we have a guest that I was very excited about, and still am. Dr. Laura Freid, director. What is the title at MECA?
President of Maine College of Art and
Essentially
Design.
Big Cheese, right?
Yeah.
The head person. Very, very excited to have you in here today. With the intro that I was sent for you, your accomplishments are vast.
It's luck of being older.
Luck of living.
Yeah, a good life. Living a good life.
Intentionally
right.
And good life. I'd like to start out with someone from your position, managing a college that primarily focuses on artistic endeavors. To start out, what is your idea or interpretation or definition of art?
Well, how about starting with a little question?
It's not in my nature.
Art is everything that's creative. It's getting more and more expansive as we have more tools to express ourselves. But art, I think, is everything that's not calculus, math. Even science can be part of art. The recipe that it requires is creativity, risk-taking, and an open mind.
Risk. So there's something in the presentation of art I found that's very, very personally risky. That you have to be honest about your deepest weaknesses and insecurities, and an ability to confront those and share those is usually a very significant ingredient in what becomes powerful art.
Yeah, I think we're all born to be creative and to express ourselves through art, through anything visual. What happens at a certain point, usually like 5 or 6 years old, someone tells you you're good or you're not good. If they say you're not good, you stop being as creative as you might be because someone's saying stop. If they tell you you're good, you continue to practice. And really all art requires hundreds and hundreds of iterations and openness and practice, whether it's music or visual art or anything creative. So I just encourage everyone to assume they are an artist till proven otherwise, and to keep perfecting their ability to express what's in their mind through the art.
Yeah, I remember growing up, it was a constant thing. I would hear like, "Oh, you're so creative," and I didn't know how to respond to that because I couldn't sense what I was. But everyone outside of me was telling me, "Oh, you're creative," which I didn't know anything else other than that. But at the same time, that creativity, that personal aspect of your personality, put you in contradiction to a lot of what was established in the systems and the normalcy that people who are part of a system, more so, that style of interacting with society and everything else in normalcy, because of creativity, and this openness, it puts you at odds with that more often.
Well, I think we have multiple intelligences. All
Right.
of us do. But the 20th century really focused on the logic intelligence, and schools focused on a very kind of European, Germanic way of learning. And it put everyone who had different intelligences in a different category. So you're looking at IQ as a particular way of looking at your mind. But when you think about the 5 or 6 other kinds of intelligences we have, emotional intelligence, visual intelligence, empathetic intelligence, they were not as nurtured. And this theory is a theory by Howard Gardner, who's a professor of education, who came up with it when in the 1970s, governments started reducing the amount of art that students had in their schools, and really denying people who have different kinds of intelligences the opportunity to really learn that way.
Right.
So experiential learning now, I think, is a much better way of teaching children or anyone really, because through experience you figure out who you are.
Right, and it's within that experience that you're able to interact with failure that teaches you so much about your efforts, but where they're misguided, and how to like, oh, okay, now I understand that this might have been a good intention, but it didn't end up in the right spot, and so I need to redirect that, correct my pattern of thought.
Right. So we started talking about risk taking. And if you discourage risk, if you encourage being excellent only or getting an A, you're really discouraging someone to try alternative ways of doing something. You're pushing down that part of humanity, that part of being a human that says, well, let me try this again.
Right.
And
Tall
it's
poppy syndrome, like heard it called. Like the tallest poppy gets cut down.
So the students who are straight A students at the age of 18 have already stopped taking risks, because you can't always get the highest mark if you don't ask questions.
Right.
So I think the students we educate are artists. Artists are people who ask questions, and designers are people who like to solve problems. And both asking questions and solving problems requires a bit of risk taking because the answer is not evident.
Right. So they're on the spectrum of creativity and usefulness towards a specific task. There's somewhat of a difference between an artist and a designer, where an artist intrinsically has more drive to continually ask, while a designer maybe takes what's used through the realization of the ask and puts them then into more pragmatic problem solving.
Yes, it's still creative, but it is focused towards an end, where artists, generally the exploration is focused towards creation, and it doesn't have a necessary place that they're going. Of course, you have to discipline your imagination. You're not going to create great art if you don't learn all the techniques and everything else you need to discipline your imagination. But some people are more inclined to be kind of freestanding questioners of the world and visual storytellers, and other people are inclined to take a problem and solve it creatively.
It's really interesting. Okay, so I mean, what I do as an architectural photographer is very much, and I've always thought of it this way, like I'm very gently playing my creativity over someone else's creation, and I'm solving a problem. Like they've got really contractually one time to make an attempt to document what they did, to then have these images for all time to show what they've done, because it's not common if you're going to be able to bring everyone to see what you created. So you have to create a witness, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And if I'm too loud in my artistic expression in showing how I see architectural creation through my photography, if it becomes too much about the photograph, people start to say, what a nice photograph, rather than what a nice work of art. There's a very nuanced thing.
So that's interesting that you bring up that overlay, because I've been fascinated with creativity since I started my career as a reporter, and I gravitated to higher education because there was new research every day, and I like that counterintuitive answer. Like
in your creativity lies mostly in writing. Do you
it
think?
started with storytelling.
Okay.
It started with writing and editing.
That's something I totally don't get. Is storytelling.
Well, you probably get it, but you're not
I have a
aware
hard
of
time
it.
creating it or
Right.
articulating exactly how to solve this. So storytelling seems to me a way to encapsulate something very important to communicate, where my thought process is far more just tell them directly what needs to be communicated,
Right.
where storytelling is a way of disguising the important thing. So it
Well, it's a
emotionally
journey.
gets in.
It's a journey that has a beginning and an end and a kind of high point,
Okay.
whereas you're talking about kind of a spot
Yeah.
projection. But when I looked into creativity, interviewed some psychologists who were studying it, they basically said creativity is that overlay you just described. It is that moment when you take one thing and put another thing on it, and that new thing is what you created.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't happen from the air.
Right.
Well, it could if you had different kinds of air that you were creating. But basically, you need those contrasts and perspectives that move you to that next step of creativity.
Right.
So you were saying earlier, you're a creative person. It's probably why you weren't particularly as comfortable in like one discipline that was very structured.
So
Right.
my mom was at Trader Joe's yesterday,
Yeah.
or the day before, one of these days, recently. And she noticed that everyone at Trader Joe's seems to be in a good mood, like all the workers, right? And, if you're in a normal grocery store,
Right.
I stocked shelves, when I was a kid, and I was such a bad employee that I actually went out and took a nap in my car during my shift and left my friend to finish unloading the truck. Horrible thing to do, but
Not you.
it was so brainless for 8 hours that I was just like, I couldn't find the attempt for like lining all the cans up and visually get some feedback.
Right.
But anyways, she asked someone, like, why do you all see so cheery? And she said, we never stay at any station for more than 2 hours. So the cashier at most will be there for 2 hours, and then they'll move to the produce section of the stocking and so every single employee anywhere in there knows about exactly anything.
Right.
And so they're not stuck on a single thing getting ground down.
Well, we're going to talk about design thinking, and design thinking is human-centered.
Right.
And design thinking applied to management would say, you are working with humans, keep them interested.
Yeah.
So it might be a little more complicated to plan that schedule, but you're going to get people who are curious and interested in what they're doing and maybe can maintain excellence for that period of time. So that, I think, is good managers have to do that. I love managing by walking around versus asking people to send me emails, because I like to be in people's worlds and see what they're dealing with, and I always learn a lot more than I would if somebody sends me something that describes what they're doing.
Now, when it comes to, it's very interesting to me how you've outlined the use of creativity versus the use of artistic expression, and how that's a great mental tool for me to think of artistic expression as the embrace of the question and producing your experience and the somewhat more objectified result of that experience in a work of art, that's a really interesting way of thinking of that, because I grew up in a culture that was artistic expression. The belief system I had was far more literal. So artistic expression was not embraced as a means of discovering further truth as much as it was memorize the ideology, and then that's the key to knowing more and having more revealed to you rather than exploration of questions.
So that goes back to the way our pedagogy has been in this country for hundreds of years.
The explanation of pedagogy.
Our education system has been based on what you described as kind of logic, focused. So study what everyone else did. If you're an artist, then study everybody else's art. And already they're taking the student out of their creative zone and into another zone. So sometimes I wish there was a little league for artists, because every kid is not meant to throw a ball, but after hours and hours of teaching almost every kid how to be in one league or another, kids learn how to do that. But if you had a little league for artists and you said, take these rocks and make a path, creative, you can be creative at the age of 2 or 3. There's a school in Italy called Reggio Emilia. It's a kind of a way of teaching. Everything is team-based. So they have 3-year-olds on teams and they say, figure out the right path to your school. And they give them, a pile of rocks. And the 3-year-olds break into teams, and there's a creative one who figures out what might be really interesting, and then someone maybe more practical who counts the rocks out. And just like what we would do, they're
Right.
teaching teamwork and creativity and results, but in a much more holistic
Right.
way of learning. And then that kid's not going to forget what they did, and then they're walking on that path to go to then they use it. So it's very powerful way of learning, which we have learned how to do in sports. But then your dad, if you had an arts little league, would go out in the backyard and play with you with different look at all the trees and say what letters are represented by these branches, and teach your eye to identify surprises and fun that are creative. And anyway, if wishes were horses, beggars would fly free. It doesn't always happen that way. That's an old saying, but wishes don't actually come to fruition unless you put a lot of action behind them.
Yeah.
But I'm very excited that so many kids, they just did a survey of kids, what do they want to be? Like the top 6 things amongst them are art and an artist or a musician. Everyone doesn't have to be a doctor or a lawyer or a fire chief. And that's just to know that kids are saying that now. I think the reason is because of the iPhone and technology. They're seeing art in their daily lives, and everything that they see is coming to them through a picture. They can quickly understand even before they know a word or a number.
Thousands of words.
Yeah.
Compressed into.
Yeah. So I think it's sparking this creative interest. This year we had a 73% increase in applications for art school. Right.
Right. That's
Like
really
why? Well, they see a way.
Mhm.
They can be an animator or a game artist. They can see that their natural ability is some way that, they could also be a painter or a sculptor, but that's harder for a kid to see.
So 2 things that I'd like to explore,
Sure.
branch off of that. One thing is what is the complexity of, and I've personally embodied this my entire life, the complexity of the creative mind and psychological disposition that makes it difficult for an individual to hold down a consistent job, which is more safe and able to provide for dependence and everything else. Like if you try and monetize creativity, for one, usually it seems those who are more likely to be creative have less type A personality of like, I'm going to start a business, I'm going to get up early, I'm going to do. Now, I grew up in a system that was far more conscientious in as far as like, you get up at a certain time, you make your bed, you clean your room. So the things that were not natural to me were I absorbed through this ideological belief system.
Right.
And then my natural disposition was one of I will never stay within a rigid thing. I have to be free to question and create.
Well, good news for you. The 21st century is more welcoming to the kind of creative. I think. Well, there wasn't that much room for the non-traditional way of thinking, but now the jobs our students are getting are innovator in residence, vice president for massive change, forensic animator. So the application, 3D asset production coordinator, digital director for climate change communication. So they're complicated new jobs, and about 65% of them, we don't even know what the job titles are.
Right.
Your kids are going to have jobs that don't exist today.
Right.
And they're probably going to be at the intersection of creativity because a lot of the things that you do by rote over and over again are being done more and more by computers anyway. So it's the I think it's the century for creativity and also for change. So I don't think anyone's going to have the same job for 40 years. And someone like me, I understand my background more looking backwards. Oh, I wanted to tell stories. I started writing, but people stopped reading what I was writing. So I got into magazines and paired up with an illustrator so they could help me share the story more broadly. And then, ultimately I got into music and documentary film because our minds now are so fast and our attention span is so short that you really need to use all the tools you have in your galaxy of tools. So start with music and then get moving images and then tell your story. None of that really makes any sense if it doesn't have a structure.
Right.
But all structure is not going to win the day anymore.
Right. So, documentary question.
Sure.
Through distancing myself from originality, I came to a point of, saying goodbye to rigorous practice of religion. And still am very much involved in the question, but set out on a trip to document interviews with a bunch of experts in the field of belief, psychology, theology, psychology, philosophy, with a friend of mine bought a van and drove across the country.
That's fabulous.
Documented a bunch of it, but
Wow.
this was all when I was 7 years ago, turning 40, and have all the footage, but just don't know how to really pull the story out of it. And also I ran into that quote by Werner Herzog, I believe that it's the Ken Burns, I think. Artist's responsibility to take the viewer to hell, but also the artist's responsibility to bring it back out. And the idea that I had when I heard that was like, well, I can take a big poo on a religious system, but what good does that do? If I can distance myself and outline the questions that were difficult or not making sense, and then offer a solution to why these aren't making sense and how to proceed, from that to a better place. So I've gotten there philosophically, psychologically, and theologically, but I don't have that. There's a point for me where now I understand for myself, and the work of that art has meant enough for me to call it quits there.
Oh.
But I have the fear of, okay, it works for me, but I might try as hard as I can and it won't be well received. Just that fear of failure, or that risk of putting yourself out there.
Well, just put that in the toilet, because it doesn't matter. If you have something to say and you have a lot of ways of saying it, I would take yourself the next step and talk to people who don't agree with you and inoculate your project with their point of view. Maybe they think that there is a great religion out there that really works, and have them tell you what that is, so that you have that other point of view. But then try to find that, and if you don't find it, you might find the answer in that quest.
Right. The weird thing that I found is that I do believe religion is a good thing, but I've simply found that my personality is to such an extreme of pull that, like any group I associate with, especially if it's along the ideological thinking boundaries for areas, that it makes me extremely uncomfortable, because all of a sudden if you group together around things that you think or believe, immediately that becomes your identity to some degree, and then questioning becomes very dangerous for that group, especially if it has to do with fears and hopes.
Well, these are such loaded questions, but I started my as a student when I was 18 years old, studying philosophy, because I was a little bit like you. I just kept asking these questions, and I didn't find the answer in Kant or that's a philosopher with K, but not
Mhm.
Kant, or any of the
Simply Kant.
the Western philosophies. But later on, as I got into Eastern music and art, I found that some of the Eastern religions, like Buddhism, ask those kinds of questions, aren't as afraid
Mm. Yeah.
of the answers and are less dominated by central authority figures. And
Right.
those are, I think, allow for more individualistic ways of looking at the world, which are better,
Mm.
probably better for creative people than,
Yeah.
but other people like the structure. It gives them, it relieves anxiety, and a lot of people in our world,
Right.
their biggest enemy is anxiety. So the more information you have, if you can believe it, the less anxious you're going to be, and that's good because nobody does well with unbound anxiety. So I
Right.
think some religion binds your anxiety, and that's good for those
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
But for other people, that might make you more anxious because
Right.
you don't believe it.
For me, anything too consistent, dependable, or solidified, it becomes a feeling of stultification, claustrophobic, wasting away, purposeless.
Well, we probably have more in common than we don't. But I feel the same way. I love change, but people have told me you love change because you're in charge of it.
Well,
Nobody likes change that someone
to
else
guide change
puts
needs
them.
to be comfortable with change.
Right,
So
right. But that is why I think artists, in general, need change. Look for it.
Mhm.
The best artists I know don't keep making that same picture that
Right.
they used to make. They're always, in fact, they're attracted to. They don't want to keep repeating that
Mhm.
same thing. But luckily, there's a place in the world for everybody.
So it kind of leads into another question I had about the psychological disposition of what would be the mass majority of your student population,
Mhm.
being far more open, have a personality type rather than conscientious, have a thing.
Well, I wouldn't juxtapose open and conscientious because I'm thinking of the animators who are very open people, but they have to be incredibly detail oriented to produce their art. So I think that our school attracts students who know they're artists and designers, and there's no other path for them. This is
Right.
what they have to do. They were kind of born to create. And the wonderful thing about it is they're now in an arts oasis where other people are like them. When you're there, the majority of people in the world aren't lucky enough to be born artists or musicians, so they fit in a little bit more easily with mainstream tracks. But if you're really creative and artistic, it's good to be in a community of other people like you. So when our students come to Maine College of Art and Design, they finally find, oh, I have I have friends here who are like me, who like to do things that I like to do. And I find them to be very collaborative, not critical of each other, although crit is a normal way of interacting, but
Right.
the students I talk to know their friends' art almost better than their own art because they're very visual and serious, and they're watching, listening, tend to be a little bit more introverts than extroverts. And our world has rewarded the extrovert, the lawyer who can speak on top of their head, the politician who can make a quick answer, but the people who require a little bit more reflection have not been rewarded by society. But that's the kind of thing you need to create great art.
Yeah, a deep honesty, a deep introspection, to some degree, a large lack of ego, so you can actually know where you're lying to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have strong egos. The expressive ego is in order to prevail in our world and be an artist, you've had to be fairly strong somewhere in there. But you also have to be flexible, and you're not driven by the same. You might not be driven by capitalism, for example. You might be driven by expression and goodness and trying to make things better. We started a new minor in sustainable art, environment and art, because so many of our students really cared about what was happening in the environment. They're not scientists, but they care about the world, and so they want to use their art to wake people up or to help people understand what's going on. And what better than a photographer? Who better than a photographer to really show people what's happening?
Right. Now, you said something earlier that I think I disagree with you on,
Okay.
but experience would tell me I'm probably wrong. With all your experience and knowledge, I'm going to guess that you're right. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about it, because it seems to me that if you group too many like-minded people together, that it becomes an insular environment that doesn't have the balance of the opposite personality type to keep the tension where it needs to be. Now, when you were saying it's very good for creative types to be around creative types in this kind of situation, are you saying that in a like for the complete existence, or for a time to come together to learn who they are and how to do that and go back out into the world to give their gift to those who are not like
Well, I believe you learn a lot from everybody. You have a mentor, teacher. Our faculty are in the classroom with our students 7 hours a day, but I think most of them are learning also from each other. And a lot of the art, particularly in the design world now, is collaborative art. So you don't want to be all alone.
Right.
You want to be, but this is just a part of your experience.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of different, I mean, we have 11 different disciplines: the woodworker, the person making public sculpture is very different than a game artist or an animator or an illustrator. So you have a whole range of human types in any discipline. But I think we are more open. We probably have a higher degree of people who are questioning their sexuality or their role in the world than a law school would have.
Yeah.
Right. But within that, there are people from all different disciplines, from all different backgrounds. The nice thing is 75% of our students come from outside of Maine, but 50% stay here.
That's
Because Portland is very receptive to their kind of thinking, and it has everything that you need: enough music, enough art, enough good food, beautiful landscape. So I think we as a school are kind of future-proofing Portland and Maine by bringing in people who are thinking a little bit differently, but applying their thoughts and their art to our community.
But I think it's such an incredibly valuable and powerful thing for Maine to have, because Maine still is a somewhat more affordable state when you consider it amongst the other New England states.
Right.
And it has, like, I moved to Ditterford a long time ago because of the potential here.
Right.
Now that potential is being used up right now. It's gentrifying. But
Well,
I was here when it was like everyone would say, why did you move here? And as an artistic mind or a creative mind, you see it and you're like, this place is a blank canvas that once was great. The business has moved out. Now there's all these spaces that creative minds can fill and create.
Yeah, and that's typical. And artists are often on the edge, the pioneers, the people, because they're willing to take a chance and because they're not necessarily filled with economic capital. They're searching for places where they don't have to spend 90% of their time generating economic capital. They want to generate creative capital. So, and this, where artists go, become very attractive to everybody else. This is a common
Sanford's next.
Yeah, so people are excited by art. They're excited by creativity. I mean, our mind has something in it that appreciates beauty and appreciates surprise. So that's why artists are usually in the vanguard. I think our society could support artists a little bit more.
So,
And help that, because that period of time when you're trying to do something new, you're risk taking, you're experimenting, and you also still need to support your family, raise children, have the kinds of things that you need to survive. And it's you have to be very creative to survive as an artist.
Yeah. So that therein lies a weird rub in the whole system. There's this risk in trying to monetize what is a very personal experience to provide for yourself,
Right.
artistic expression. The thing that we have is it, and I'd like to run this very odd theory.
Okay.
That I imagine our reality or society as essentially building a medieval wall. We'll think of it in that way.
I'm with you. Okay.
So this wall protects all of us. It's a place where we can be safe. It's our homes, it's our roads, it's our grocery stores, it's everything that we collectively have created as a human species. And those who are open use it for a time, but they have to leave it to go out into chaos to experience things that we can subjectively experience, bring into a more concrete utility out of the abstract, and present back to the wall of the city, essentially to say, hey, look, I left the safety of the city, but I've made this very important brick that I believe is important. And everyone in the city looks over the wall and says, you know what, you left our city and you disregarded all of the boundaries that we set up. You went out into the dangerous area. You've come back with something that we don't think is good enough for the wall. We're now going to decapitate you. So I can use you as an example. Wow. Or you come back and you say, hey, I disregarded all the rules, but I was able to find further truth, and I put it into this creation it is. You show it, and if you've done your work well, the people on the wall cannot deny that there is truth in what you created. And they say, we will highly reward you. We will add it to the wall. The whole thing will expand. And they put you on their shoulders and log you around town, and you can receive a lot of value for taking the risk, but doing it successfully. Now, the different thing is that those who are open do that process as a creative act constantly for the benefit of the whole. But in leaving it, they're on their own to take that risk. In my experience, in the past anyway.
Well, that's a nice little game. That's a nice little. It's interesting. I think.
Let me finish the concept though, because the people that stay more so within the wall have more of a conscientious disposition, where they say, we've created this and we've approved it. We have to protect and maintain it because it offers all of us safety and the ability to recuperate. Right. Now, the interesting thing that I find is that when the conscientious types leave the wall, they're going essentially to war. They're going to protect what's established. And they know beforehand what their reward is when they return and the risk. So when they return, they're less valued, which is kind of sad, but they knew before they left. So there's less risk but they sacrifice physically reality more. It's a weird relationship we have to that.
With all the generalizations that we may be throwing into all this, one thing we know, we watchers of human history know, is change is going to happen. You cannot. Nobody stays 2 years old or 5 years old. There's a trajectory. We know from thousands of years of history that things change. We're in a period of incredible change right now. Change about how we view our climate, change about how we view our sexuality, change about how we view what's important to ourselves. So the people who can navigate change are going to be the leaders some way. Now, sometimes personally, they don't feel the gifts that they have aren't apparent till 20 years later. So sometimes great artists aren't even recognized for their greatness during their lifetime. But I feel like they are the reason we progress, the reason we get better, the reason we see things differently is because of those pioneer people. Not only artists, there are writers, truth tellers in all sorts of fields, doctors who break the rules and come up with a new way of seeing how to fight illness. All of that is in that. I call it the beach, the place between the water and the forest. It's the beach that has the interesting sea glass and interesting different animals that can go from water to woods like that. People who are comfortable in that area, on that edge between two different worlds, that's the creative world. And It's an appropriate metaphor for us here, surrounded by more beach than almost any other state in the country. But I think, why do people like it? Why is it so interesting? It's the thing that you talked about, your own creativity, that overlay of two different systems. And then, you don't pick up everything that you see on the beach. You pick a few things up, and then it really inspires you, right? So the people who are comfortable with the new, I think, are the leaders of the world. If you look back, you can see that in their time. Sometimes you could be Joan of Arc. Sometimes you could be Jesus Christ. You could be somebody who is not appreciated by your own generation. But eventually, because we have communication, we know that separates us from animals. We know what happened, and we know how to improve it.
Right.
And so then, back to our conversation about design. What designers do is communicate visually, help people communicate visually to one another. And in a world that's more and more visual now, their role is becoming more and more important. And it's why, back to Maine College of Art and Design, 60% of our students are now in the design areas, where 10, 15 years ago, it was 30%. Because there's an attraction to that kind of maybe because there's so many problems to solve, but there's also incredible tools you can use to express yourself. So.
Now, as this, essentially progressive, changing society that we're all a part of, that's
right,
continually changing, it feels like we're at an inflection point with AI coming in. That I'm. As you can see, I'm very connected to a Western mindset of highly using logic and articulate thinking to try and find something, because it's helped me think about what I previously held as belief. But I also naturally have this just huge question.
Right, you're a quester.
So in the last 10 years, I've gone from people laughing at me the first time I said the word cognitive dissonance, because it's way out of my league. And now
it's a great concept, though.
Yeah, and I held a lot of that, and I had to work through it. But the interesting thing, just in naming a psychological experience, like, oh, that's cognitive dissonance. What? It has a name? And oh, yeah, I have done that. People know about this. Oh, okay. I apply it to that, and I can much more accurately encapsulate it. But the thing I found in interacting with ChatGPT is that the creative sphere, almost more than anything than I realized before, is going to be deeply affected by artificial intelligence. Where I only thought before it would take robotic type jobs.
Right.
The subjective creative thing, it does not have the ability for subjective experience, I don't think. My worry is that with ChatGPT, we're interacting with people on a chain, and we don't think there's a chain on it, but there is. And if that chain breaks, it might be bad, might not. Don't know. Idea. But it in interacting with it, it is outlined how incredibly there's going to be just drastic change in the creative world.
Yes.
How's MECA thinking of that?
I mean, there's no denying this is an incredibly strong tool. Whether it will change us more than the internet did, or more than computers did, probably. But the great thing about human nature is we're adaptable. Humans came up with it. Humans will come up with a way to monitor it and educate about it. And there's so much good. The tedious work that if you were fortunate economically to be able to pay someone else to do, you paid people in India and China to do that. Now computers will do that. Well, I think that's good, because then people who've been doing that can get released from that kind of drudgery and do the next level of work. So I am a change embracer. There are challenges.
Think them being relieved of that job won't cause deep financial hardship, or they will just graduate?
There'll be new jobs that'll probably be more interesting than the old ones. I mean, think of the old factories.
So you do think it's a boat racing all?
Well, just when I look back at the turn of the last century in the factories and the kind of work you were describing when you were talking about grocery stores, that robotic work that human beings had to do to feed the the supply chain in a factory. That doesn't happen anymore. I think that's good. People then have to be, find a new way of working. But as we just talked earlier, creative roles almost in every company are there, and everyone is realizing how important design and organization is. And the companies that are really doing well have a high degree of, like Nespresso, like it's just a coffee, but they're color coding it. I watched a 3-year-old play with the little pods the other day, and it was almost like an art tool. Somebody spent a lot of time and energy, or our phones, like. I have a certain amount of intelligence, but I had to use a parking app today, and it's
So it's fun to do that first time.
but I wouldn't have been able to do it without all the icons and everything that come your way. So things that required a toll taker. And that's a job that nobody should have to do if a computer can do that. So we just have to adapt. There'll be a period of disruption and great angst. And certainly you don't want technology stealing art. So now the lawyers and people who are equipped to do that have to protect the artist. And I think right now at this moment, DALL-E and other AI instruments had the ability to exploit art. We have to protect our design,
people could
protect
say,
our
"Do this in the
originality.
style of Wes
Yes.
Anderson," and it generates immediately these things that if a human had done that, you'd like, wow, what incredible talent. We must take you so
But,
long.
I'm going to go back to music because that was disrupted earlier than art was with Spotify. And I used to work in the music business with
Sampling, it's like all of that.
you would have an organization that if you were good, they would buy your music and then they would make a recording and they would control it. Maybe they control you, but if you were good enough, you could get paid for it. And then all of a sudden, the economic system was kaflooey and everything was available. And musicians weren't getting paid for their work other than a penny for listening. So it's still, so we have to find, but it's still the most important thing. If you look at yourself at 15, you remember the music almost more than anything else. It's a big marker for creativity and for expression. Just look at what just happened with Taylor Swift, for example. I mean, she has an ability to tell stories that attract people who are in the same emotional space and really connect, right? And there will be a reckoning and a way for our musicians to get paid moving forward. It just changes.
Right.
And when these disruptive moments happen, which technology introduces every day, there's that moment where no one knows what's going to happen. But I have only seen it get better and better. Movies and movie theaters and movies on your screen, and people were afraid with cable TV that all these industries would go under. They don't go under, they change.
Right.
People still love to see a play in a crowded room. We're still human beings. So the challenge for the next generation is just to be super creative and nimble and have all the tools. You can't do this from ignorance. You have to have familiarity with all the tools available to you.
Yeah, if I'm thinking of, if I'm trying to visualize the positive outcome of what AI could do to the changing creative landscape and artistic landscape,
Right.
I would try to think of it as AI being now a tool chest that you can take with you, where before you had to go naked into the woods and see if you could kill a bear and bring it back. Now you have more so the things that we have created within society to be able to access all of those at all times and go into the woods to, maybe killing a bear is a bad analogy, going to Alaska this summer. It's on my mind, but I'm not going to kill bears.
No,
I'm going to not be killed by bears.
You'll enjoy the totally different visual that you'll see there.
I hope my son's pretty into nature photography, so we're going to shoot bears in the most peaceful sense. Sorry. But that it seems like AI is going to be kind of a, if you think of it like the space shuttle is something that you can be tethered to in space to effectively do work. We can be tethered to AI in the chaos to create those bricks now that we bring back to present to the city. It seems like the creative process is getting turbocharged and it's going to be those, like when I entered architectural photography,
Right.
I used digital photography.
Right.
And a lot of the people who were established at that time were like, this is cheating. This isn't fair. You don't have to change every single light bulb like we did. You're cheating. You're not any good at this. Well, I was young, so I had this open mindset of like anything I can use to do what I need to do is fair game. This is not me being an artist. This is me being a commercial, creative.
But it can only ultimately you have to protect against people who steal ideas and misuse creativity. Ultimately, the person who has the hand-mind brilliance that an illustrator has is always going to be the person you choose to interpret your world. How they do it is going to be different. And I just believe in progress, and I think it's exciting. And I think we need other people who are the logical thinkers, the lawyers, to make sure it's protected, to make sure that what's important, the creative original, is sourced properly. But that will happen. Right now, we're at this moment of unknown.
Right.
We don't know how powerful. We know it's very powerful. We know people who don't know what they're doing can make something look good, but it's not the same. You know someone who designs your house is going to do a lot better job than a computer will in designing a house that's going to be good for you, because the human interface is what's important.
Right.
And that ability to be empathetic, to listen, to hear what you need, and then to apply it to what's available is still the most important thing.
Right.
But it'll just change.
That same human will be better at doing that if they use a computer with them than if they were just simply...
Yeah, I mean, the amount of time it used to take architects to render something, which now computers can do, that time can be used for more creative things. And we have more things to think about, like how to make it sustainable and how not to use so much fuel. And you can't solve all problems at the same time. So I guess I enjoy living in the contemporary world, and I also love looking back. And understanding how things happened.
Right.
So I hope that students of today still appreciate the history that got us where we are.
Yeah.
But people know what's good, what's beautiful, what works elegantly, and those things ultimately prevail.
Right. Now, with the changing landscape of education, the cost of education, the conversation around that, and the ability to learn pretty much everything you need to know to be whatever you want to be, that you can just simply do it on YouTube, technically is there.
Right.
But what do you lose in seeking an education that way rather than going to a school and doing deaf? Like, what's the trade-off?
Well, I mean, first I'll say I'm dedicated personally to making sure that all of our students have financial aid and merit aid. So they deserve to be supported because they have a natural ability that will take them as far as possible, and we have to reward that ability. So I spend a lot of time making sure that we have 100% of our students get some aid. If they have financial aid need, they get that need, and they all qualify for merit aid. Now that makes me spend more time doing something like fundraising than I might love to do, but ultimately fundraising is telling a story too. I'm just talking to people about do you want a real life person designing your house, or do you want a computer assisted YouTube? What are you going to get from that? Right. I like watching Jacques Pepin make a meal over watching a video of someone I don't know. I know that it's going to taste better, that he has all this experience, that no technician is going to be as good. And why do people come to Portland? They don't want Arby's and whatever the chain of the week is. They love the indie food here. Why? Because somebody's really thinking about it, and there's a lot of mixed metaphors here. Like it's not pure Japanese food, but you can go to some place they've taken just as much time creating an incredible meal. So I think there's a great appreciation for the unique, for what's not a chain, what's independent, and what's focused on tomorrow. It's very attractive.
Yeah, Portland is a very
progressive
and rewards the original
Yeah.
as a city very much so.
And I think it's kind of it also rewards empathy and listening. People are just a little bit less on a fast track here to get to the next spot. So I have a garden outside my house, and I'm just shocked sitting on the porch at how many people are just really stopping to appreciate things. I think it's great. So I believe in progress, but I also believe we have so much to learn. We can find out so much because of technology. We can Google now things that you would have to find some revered teacher and ask this question.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you stop asking questions. You start asking the kind of questions you're asking, like what's it all about, and is there a God, and where are we going, and all those things are the more profound questions. But when you listen to good music or see good art, you feel all that intentionality in what you're looking at. You appreciate that.
Yeah, I found one in listening to some intellectuals' presentations or conversations. The intellectuals that can manage a highly emotional state while staying articulate can reach
Right.
much further
Right.
in realization than the person who's highly controlled but not in an emotional state. But the people who reach an emotional state and allow the emotional state to attack more than sit in the emotions and try and be honest about what they're saying can shed a light so much further into progress, it seems.
Yeah, I agree.
I wonder what
Mhm.
what that is and what is the actual inner working, because I've also found that when I'm struggling with a concept, I'll find a song that is very emotive for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll put it on repeat, and I can listen to it about 50, 60 times as I'm trying to write or think about a subject.
Right.
And then towards the end of getting that, some clarity on that idea, where once you're there, you're like, how did I ever not see this? But once you're there, you kind of, you bring all the emotion out of the song, and then the song means less to you after that. But in that moment of creation, it's the energy that pushes you.
Well, I mean, creativity is still a mystery. We know a lot. That song might have calmed you down, uh, kind of calmed your nerves as you were trying to create something, or gave you some anchor that you didn't have in your own creativity. People are listening to podcasts more and not reading. Why is that? I think
I'm 100% a product of that. I can
Right.
barely read a book, but I love listening to these long
but
form
but when I talk to the students all of our students get their news from podcasts, pretty much. Not all. There's always. Let me take that back. A lot of students get their information from podcasts. What they tell me is they like multitasking, so they like to listen and cook, or listen and exercise, which you can't do when you're reading. I think it's hard to read now because we're reading on our devices and we're interrupted and we're used to a different level of pacing. The nice thing about podcasts, it's like you're listening but editing as you listen.
Right.
Probably not getting as much as you do when you're fully concentrated on something, but it's harder and harder to concentrate because of the world we're in now, when we're all multi-sensate. And your son probably has less concentration than you have because he was born in a different generation where
My wife's really conservative.
Yeah.
They don't hardly ever even get to pick up a phone. I mean, they use our phones occasionally, but they're outside.
Yeah, how old are they?
14.
Well, that's good.
14 as of tomorrow.
But there's a moment where your power over what they do and their friends' power over what they do, you're just at that shift.
Yep.
And next year, whatever you say is not going to be as important as what their best friend says, and
Sure.
they're going to want to play X or Y or Z, and they're going to want to know, have thumb dexterity, and so, or maybe not. But anyway, I think we can adapt to all this. It's all created by human beings, and we benefit tremendously. And I think we appreciate the appreciation for things that are old and real is not going away. People still love wood, and they love the smell of things, the ocean, and they're not going to be satisfied with air diffusers. You know,
How do you think the concept and the consumption of art will change with what you're describing as far as how much we're changing with we process far
Right.
more in the present constantly, and I only get anything out of like a painted or printed piece of art. I've only found if I'm stuck in a situation where I can't get away, I can't be on my phone and that piece is in front of me. So marriage counseling, it always has
Right.
bad art on the walls,
right?
but I get to find the appreciation of that art in those moments.
Well, I mean, the pandemic, I think, gave people that long pause.
Right.
I know for me, I am very, very visual person. I like what's around me, but I wound up replacing all the art that I had in my house because it wasn't enough for me anymore, and that's where I was. Your aesthetic changes. Why would a poster that you liked when you were 30 be the kind of poster you like when you get up now? And it's not, but you don't think of changing it. You know, so people who really know something deeply change their world. You don't. You shouldn't stay with the same visual markers, and you shouldn't stay stuck in the same music.
Right.
But working in the music field with new music from different countries, people love to hear the old stuff that they know really well, whenever that was imprinted. And you know, why would people still want to hear Beethoven when there's so much other music? Well, that you knew that, and it gives you comfort, and you're not as receptive to some other thing till you get surprised. You know,
Right.
till you hear something, you know, what is that? There's a new instrument I never heard before. It came from Persia. It sounds amazing. I want to know more about it, and then that opens you up again. And the more older you get, the harder it is to keep, you know, generations in the car. Like somebody wants to listen to the 70s, somebody that makes them nauseous. You know, they want rap music, and you know, that's just I think you're most imprintable when you're between the ages of 0 and 25. And it's just, I think those who stay alive to the world push themselves to accept the new, but it's not that easy.
That's a really interesting thing that I haven't heard many people realize. That you, so there's this thing I tried to write about the creative process last year,
Oh,
and it like
congratulations! That's
well, it's weird because I think I understand the creative process fairly well and why it's there and what it's for, because that was my end to understanding what this all means. It's like a highway concept for me to understand the flow of traffic, if you will.
right.
And the example I used was that our home has we saved up a long time, paid our other homes off, sold it, and built one. We have this nice living room now that has floor to ceiling windows for like 25 feet and it wraps the corner a little bit.
That's great.
And the grass is only about a foot below that, and it feels like the forest is there, and there's a little rock wall.
That's great.
The first time you walk in, it's like, whoa. And you know, it's small and refined, blah blah blah, but it's impressive. Now the 1,000th time you walk in,
You take it for
there's
granted.
not
Yeah.
the same
Right.
emotional presence, but you still know there's a knowledge that it's beautiful and
Right.
you can appreciate it, but it doesn't overwhelm you emotionally. Now, a couple 2 years ago, probably it was in the fall. It was later in the day. I was in the kitchen, which communicates with the whole one big. And the sun was going, you know, low in the sky and coming through the forest, and standing there looking. It's like, oh, I know this is very beautiful. It's really nice. I turn around and get a cabinet. The cabinets are glossy, white, just flat, minimalist, white kind of. But I can see the scene reflected in the cabinets roughly, but I
Right.
can see it, and I'm like, whoa, the emotional presence all of a sudden of the same space is there.
Right.
That I see in the reflection. So I turn around to look at it, no emotion. Come back to the cabinet,
Right.
full emotion. What's going on there? It was mirrored in the cabinet.
Right.
And I saw the hill going the other way, and the light was on the other side of the trees. and the
Yeah.
house-
You just had insight, which is knowledge at first sight.
Right.
I'll say that again. Insight is knowledge at first sight. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's an amazing moment when it happens.
Right.
And if you were a painter at that moment, it might change the whole way you paint. You might start painting with that white, shadowy background versus the transparent background. But you have to keep pushing yourself to see, because we're all blind.
Right.
Familiarity makes us blind to who we love, blind to what we
Now, do you think that's a trait of people that are open that become not bored with what they've experienced already, but less inspired, and they know that novel experience holds the inspiration in it, and so they're constantly called to seek novel experience?
Well, I think good design, like you, can spark you. Like uh, it can allow for that novelty when people get bored in the closed off rooms that are boxy. It dulls you out, right? So I definitely think creative people are lucky in that, and cursed. And I mean, lucky that you see the new and exciting, and cursed that you are always seeking.
Right.
So you have to find your way. I totally admire painters who just saw the work of one of our Honor Mack, who's a painter in our on our painting faculty. She had a sabbatical. We try to give faculty time off every 7 years or so to find their own talent. Or we also have programs for teachers who are teaching art, who it's so hard to be an art teacher that sometimes you forget your own art, so I had to spark their creativity. But her new paintings are so different from what she was doing. They're both excellent, but it's hard to, if you know how to do something really well and everyone's buying that art, to say, no, I'm going to do something different. But look at our clothing design. I love to see new ways of adornment, same as it used to be. But that's why you don't want to look the way you did when you were 18.
Right.
Some people do. You can tell those people
Yeah.
are comfortable in a particular moment in time, but others are always like pushing it.
Right. And I've always found that Europeans, for some reason, will continually graduate with their presentation of their clothing, where Americans kind of freeze at either high school or college graduation.
I mean, I don't know who's listening out there, and I don't want to disparage my own country, but I agree that, people, because I traveled for 12 years, I was, all over. I had more, every night was a different city, because I was touring with a music group. So you could tell the Americans were still wearing their khaki pants, and the older ones a blue shirt and khaki pants and sneakers, and then you'd be in Japan or Korea, and you'd see such amazing different perspectives. But in all those societies, we see the change, but there's plenty of people still walking around in suits in those countries too. I think we're not as attuned visually as other societies are, and I just am not smart enough to figure out why. But it doesn't feel as fun. I love going to Finland or Scandinavia or even countries that have the same style historically that might be more tribal. It's so much more colorful and interesting. We have kind of reduced, for safety's sake, people feel like this works, so they just keep repeating, and I just think they're denying themselves the fun of expression in fashion and textiles. There's so many more interesting fabrics out there now.
It would seem like America would have the cultural climate to be far more embracing outside of the norm and expressive, but also at the same time, as we've both been able to see, it's the general consensus is one of like, well, this is good enough. Let's be pragmatic about it. It's just,
it's a pragmatic culture. It's predominantly Western European traditions, and they, had their own cultures. But we had a fashion show last month. The work is so amazing. Some of it is very traditional. Some of them were designing, beautiful ballroom clothing that they've never worn. But there was one collection that was all seaweedy and nets and shells, and it was so exciting and interesting. And I think it's only a 22-year-old who could probably see that that could be clothing, could
Right.
see their way through that. And then everybody responds, no matter what age you are and what you're looking like. You know what's good and interesting. And novelty is still something we all love, or we'd still be eating, Campbell's tomato soup.
Right.
Like, so, new taste, new vision, that requires new eyes, new interpretation, and that's where the creatives are always going to be in the lead. And I'm so excited about sustainable house designs and changing the American concept of McMansions, huge houses on small lots with no external anything.
Right.
But you can see now people are paying attention.
Yeah, especially in
To
the
the future.
Northeast. We've traveled back and across the country quite a few times now, driving, and you see, the common housing types, in the Northeast. I look at it as from an architecture perspective. And having the background of architecture, I look
Right.
at details and quality of craftsmanship. And just in general, the Northeast has a lot higher quality of craftsmanship
Right.
and a pretty good grasp of design and beauty above the
Well,
rest of the
I think you have to have a little bit more money to live here because it was established first. So the places that you could go and kind of build a modular house on a piece of land for less than, we're seeing what's happening to, if it's poorly designed and not well thought of, they're blowing up away or falling apart. But you need financing too. But if America can get out of having green lawns and picket fences that have been around since the 20s, 30s, and 40s, that would be great for the world.
Yeah.
And I think it'll happen. Change happens slowly, but I don't think your kids are going to go for that kind of home. It may not be that anybody wants a home anymore, that the freedom of moving around becomes more appealing. And we have no idea what the future holds. But the way, I think, to be receptive to it and to greet it with the most enthusiasm is to give kids the tools they need to address it and to encourage that questing. Like, I don't want most people don't want to live in their parents' home. They want something different. They see what they enjoyed it provides security, but they see what they didn't have. And now there are people who've lived far away from the land who want to get back to the land. They see the beauty of that, where in the 70s, maybe nobody wanted to be a farmer. So it's so complicated.
Yeah.
What we're supporting with capitalism, what we're supporting politically, and what is good for the world.
Yeah, I mean, when I was 17 to 23, 24, during the summer months, I would live out in my car, surf during the day, work at night. And now I see, and to me it was like, geez, ultimate freedom, very low cost of, housing myself for,
Right.
I can surf, and that's kind of my path, and I'm just working in the kitchen at night, go jump
Right.
in the ocean, go sleep in my car, do it all again the next day for 3-4 months.
Yeah.
Great, And now it seems like everyone's kind of doing that with camper vans and people all over.
Yeah, that.
And it's weird. Like when I did it, like no one was as much hardly doing that.
Well,
and now it's common.
And there'll be something else, all this generation wants to retool a vehicle and live out of it. And that was,
it's affordable for one.
and you can see the world. But I think it's great that people are accepting it. But it's, it's back to philosophy. What you have is not what you like. You want what you don't have, and then you seek to make the world better. And I think that's why I would argue it's getting better. You could say there's lots of things we lost, which is true, but we gained so much from what we have. And I think every boardroom should have an artist at the table, or a poet, or someone who is inclined to ask questions. We'll be better off that way. And you see companies that have good design and good questioning are succeeding more
Right.
and thriving, and people who are repeating the old stuff are going to stall out.
Right. Are you familiar with the concept of spiral dynamics at all?
I can't say I am.
It might be a bit of a harebrained idea. I've heard podcasts here and there about it, but it basically is a psychological take on the progression of society, that it goes from kind of centralist strongman authority to collective authority.
Right.
And then each one becomes an ebb and flow of kind of open to conscientious times in society, and the more community oriented as a response to the central strongman is more the left and the back, right? And as it progresses, it gets better, but it is advancing in its complexity.
So that's reminding me of Hegel, an old German philosopher who there's a term called Hegelian, which is that you go for what you don't have. When you choose leaders, you have a progressive, then you have conservative. Parenting styles go that way. So that's an old philosophy. The spiral kind of expansion seems like an innovation on that philosophy. Yeah. But I think that's also human nature. We tend to devalue the known and put higher value on the unknown.
Well, I think people like you and I would be more open to a positive response to novel experience do. But the thing that I find, that I have a lot of conservative people in my family, and the thing I find from interacting with them is that they highly, highly value truth as being something established outside of experience that we relate to and follow, where the more open individuals seem to think that, yes, truth is out there, but it's only through our experience that we get to outline it. And so there's this constant,
I mean, you don't choose your nature, right? You're born that way. As famous musicians have said, and you and I were born a certain way of questioning. I sometimes think, wouldn't it be nice if I really believed in this in a way? I think it is comforting for some people, and I don't think everyone is the same. Like, I think if everybody had the kind of open viewpoint, there might be a lot more chaos in the process. So we need firemen and policemen and superintendents and engineers just as much as we need creative people. I just don't like it when someone puts their philosophy, whatever it is, onto anybody else.
Yeah, this is what I found to work, and I'm going to make it work.
Yeah, I don't like it with dog training, and I don't like it in any, but certainly with human education. I believe in people, and I think they do best. They need to be guided and disciplined, but you have to allow for that quest. And then you need a system to make it all work. Nothing works without some structure and system. But if you can flex, technology helps us really flex. We don't have to have the same kind of steel everywhere. There's now new lumber that is just as strong as steel was. That's just great.
Right.
We're going to have to do that, and we're going to have to learn how to eat plant-based food. And all these things, I think more and more people are understanding, but probably is not going to happen in any one person's lifetime.
I don't know, with AI coming on board, it seems like the charge has changed.
Well, then I say document and tell the story as best you can, so people after you understand your quest and pick up on it rather than repeat it.
Right.
The sad thing is when people learn the same lessons over and over again, and then we don't have progress.
So how is the MECA+D
Yes.
is now a documentary school essentially, or
we're now called Maine College of Art and Design. We have the majority of our students are now in the design areas: illustration, animation, game art, fashion, and technology.
So that
but we are
specifically
for the design areas.
Documentary.
No, we do have a SALT documentary program. Just so happens that fits in pretty well. I think it's in the audio video area. That was an acquisition. The school needed a home, and we're a great home base, and all the systems are there, so they don't have to have their own facilities or anything. And That's a little bit older student. And then we have a graduate program in fine arts, which is if you want to teach art, you get a master's degree program, an MFA, and that is really a great time to explore your own creativity, but get a credential so you can teach. And we also have a master's in teaching art, and 100% of those students get jobs right out of school. So anyone who's an artist out there and wants to teach for a few years, it takes 1 year to get your teaching certificate at our college, and then you can teach and do your own art. So I think we're our own little niche. We're kind of nimble, we're small, we're thriving in this current society, but it takes everybody. We depend on the generosity of our community. Portland and Maine is very philanthropic, community oriented.
Now, what does MECA do to prepare its students for the monetization?
That is such a good question.
We want a hard thing, especially for the personality type that is creative.
Yes, and
it's a more sensitive, and that's a difficult thing.
But we're finding that not just parents, but students are coming in receptive to learning the tools that will help them, and they know they need it. So we actually changed we used to do kind of professional training in the last year because students didn't want to talk about it before then, but now they come in asking, how am I going to be successful? And we are fundraising to get paid internships for all of our students. So they might be micro internships, but I think the best way to prepare for a career is to be in it. Like, it would be great for an intern to be with you. They might have a fantasy about what this is all about, but just learning you learn so much with experience. So, and then we've integrated our professional training into the curriculum. So we don't wait till students are 1 month before graduation to teach them about presenting. We have professionals come in and look at their portfolios, not just for the how good it is, but also so they can tell their story. If you're going to hire someone, they have to be able to tell you what they can do and why they can do it.
Right.
And that's training. Most people aren't comfortable talking about themselves. And then our critiques are also based on teaching students to be receptive to feedback. Not all feedback is, hey, you're great. That's not the most helpful feedback. The most helpful feedback is, well, right here, were you trying to do this because I'm not feeling it, I'm not seeing it? Or did you realize when you're animating this hip, it's not moving the way you move, so you need to change that? But it's everybody goes through it, and together they improve. So we are very focused on making sure they are ready for whatever profession they choose to have.
Yeah, I think working in a creative environment where there's solutions that need to happen for the success of what you're doing, you have to be able to take that criticism. And by going through architecture school, it's constant, like, all right, put yourself out there and ideas, receive criticism on that. And you have to build this trusting relationship so you can hear, the thing that it does not do well is translate into your married or spousal relationship. And no one really tells you that.
Oh, you mean that kind of career?
Well, that kind of thought process. I'm so odd as a personality type that I feel that everyone's experience was the exact same as mine. I'm just in my head so intensely that I felt that my wife should be able to take the same kind of interaction as far as, like, here's something that you attempted to do for us as a family, but here's my critical approach on it, and I'll give you that now, and then you'll go and change it and it'll be better. It's just horrible advice in that situation. It took a while.
I do think all of us in 2023 have an empathy deficit.
I was leading the charge of that.
Everything has been focused on me, you're great. That's, students tell me they're proud of themselves, and I say, no, you want someone else to say they're proud of you. Be critical of yourself. Be open to other people. So I think, and I do think good designers and good artists need to be empathetic, or they're not going to communicate to anyone else. You need to be in touch with the other person, and listening and empathy, two things. Listening is also really important, and they are decreasing in our society. I won't give you the reasons why, but I think we need to practice that. We need to really try to understand the other. And if we do, we're going to be more successful in whatever we're trying to do. So it's not just helping professionals who need to be empathetic. Everybody does. At that Trader Joe's experience, that's creating empathy. Those workers are understanding what it's like to be in each of those positions. And I think, having your kids do whatever you hire people to do on occasion is a good thing.
Yeah, in the Trader Joe's now, it's like every part of the store that they go to work for that time, they think in terms of we, rather than they do the stock, I or we do this. And so everything in that store is we.
Yeah, but I watch little kids 1 to 3 in the playground. They're pretty kind.
1 to 3. 4 still good.
Well, but I mean, there is kindness. It's a human, and we can encourage it or we can discourage it. I feel like for our students, I mean, no one knew what my work was when I was a philosophy major in a liberal arts college or university. When I graduated, no one knew what I was doing other than my friendship role, but they didn't know my papers or what I was thinking necessarily. But in our school, everybody sees the work. When students graduate, it's projected on the screen. You are identified with what you brought and how you saw the world, and it makes you more empathetic because when someone else shows something what they struggled with, and you can see the progress, and it's very rewarding. So I think it is experiential education. I think that's more profound, and I think that those bonds are those eyes that have watched your work will be the eyes that you'll go back to when you're doing new work. And the faculty, their voices are in your head because they've been in rooms with you for 6 hours a day. And our studios are open 24/7. So if you got creative at 3 a.m, you could go to your studio. It's open to you. That's very unique. It doesn't from a leadership point of view, it can create a little anxiety. But I think it hasn't been abused. Students are mostly working on their ideas, which they couldn't do if they were just in the dorm room.
Right. Yeah, I've watched my youngest son, who's not the most open of personality, but he's highly perceptive and sensitive. But he's very conscientious as we do it this way, you have to do it that way.
Right.
Or there's laws.
The rules.
But I've watched his very loving and open sensitivity and empathy go back behind the wall as he's gotten older, because he starts to discover how difficult the world can be. Right. And I've watched him go from this 1 to 3 to kind of mirroring me as far as like borders and thick skin. And it's only in my 40s where I've discovered I don't need that. I'll be far better off with the confidence of who I am without that thick skin, because then I can return that empathy in sympathy and in interaction of doing things for others to empower them. That is extremely rewarding. Right. But up to this point, it's always been like I have to protect myself because I'm actually very sensitive behind this thick skin. Right. And to know that the creative process is usually engaged in by people who are very sensitive, because you have to see to be that. To then go out and say, I will show this to the world, and then they're like,
it's not. I am the last person to say this is easy. Yeah. I don't think creative people have a choice. I mean, you can repress your creativity, but that's going to be far worse than taking the path where you are creative and you do get criticized and you might not succeed all the time. And sometimes you're just blocked, and that's not easy either. Yeah.
Or trapped by your own devices too.
But it's worth, plowing through, because that high you get when you have that insight you have, and when someone hears you, sees you, when you've communicated, that's really powerful. You are
Yeah.
making a big difference, and very few people get to make a big difference in the world.
Yeah, it's that thing that if you really do your deep introspective objectification of the perception through subjective experience, I think I found something.
Yeah.
And then someone else said, "You helped me see it." That you realize, whoa, I
Yeah.
just
So,
helped someone see further.
and people do it in different ways. Therapists do it their way, doctors do it their way, but the creative world does it by creating mostly beautiful. It could be terrifying and ugly as well, but it makes an impact.
That is those are portraits of prison inmates where we
Oh.
had them write a letter to the younger self, but took it in Photoshop and put the letter around them.
Oh,
They wrote, it's in their handwriting. So there's
that's
this good
amazing.
back and forth creative aesthetic within it. And a gallery, it stayed up months longer than it should have because people kept coming to see it. They would call ahead of time, like, we want to come see this.
Who did the photography?
I did. Tim
Oh.
and I had the concept.
That's
did
amazing.
It went kind of baby viral, picked up in Germany and New Zealand on
Yeah,
radio
because
shows.
you're showing the dimensionality of people where we're only seeing one part of them. They broke a rule.
Yeah.
But they're still human beings who learn something, who have something to say. It might be more profound.
Well, the point that I'm trying to make is it was deeply profound. We'd watch soccer moms sit there and read it,
Right.
break into tears. Like they'd never have that interaction with the inmate,
Right.
but they're able to privately eavesdrop on what that inmate is saying to their innocent self
Right.
beforehand, and that like transference of just into their shoes is overwhelming to a lot of people. It stayed up in the galleries far longer than
Oh,
it should
that's
have
great.
because people wanted to see it. After that, they had to move on and do other
Right.
stuff. But we still kept getting calls of people wanting to come from out of state to see this. So we put it up in halls of the North End
Oh.
Mill down here. People would come and they're like, "Oh, can I go?" All right, just go walk through the mills where all the businesses
See, I
are.
see a documentary film there.
Well, there's another one
Right.
that, and so there's up there. But then the workers in the mill took it upon themselves to take it down. It was
Oh.
too much to see every day.
Oh, well then it's time for something different.
Well, for them it was too much,
Right.
and it was in like a back parking place, but they didn't like seeing it every day, and no one wanted to buy anything to do with this because
Oh,
it was
well
too
then,
much.
that's a different kind of art. That's
Yeah,
not
it's
a
really
commercial
art.
That's really for museums.
Yeah, it's like it's in a gallery and a museum, but the gallery's not going to be able to sell it, and there's no monetary side to it that I've found. But it was the most meaningful thing
Well,
I've ever
I mean,
done.
you could get. There are foundations that give you grants for work like this, but that's a whole other art form to figure out
Yeah,
how to do that. But obviously, it was meaningful and right-minded. We have students in our printmaking department who are making bags with designs on them with kits for prisoners who are just getting out of their time served so they can re-enter the society with something beautiful and helpful, and it's like their sense of what you would need. And they spent like 2 months making these beautiful books and how-to presentations and just nice art that's all in kind of a gift bag to give to people as they re-enter, which I think, it says we hear you, we take you seriously, we want you to succeed, and we're doing what we can.
There's an interesting level of art actually within the prison walls. They had to come back and document. They've allowed different inmates to do murals in like
Right.
the cafeteria and other areas, and some of them are actually good. Like
Yeah,
not
I mean,
just expression, but actually good.
we know what's good art when we see it. It strikes us, and why wouldn't somebody be able to make it? They have some misfortune in their life that has nothing to do with their ability to communicate. It's another part. Hopefully, they'll learn from.
To me, it was interesting to go and shoot it and think that there was a man in captivity who was here painting a scene of like a Maine cabin on the coast and a woman in a white dress on the thing. He was behind the walls. but he
Right,
was
with his
painting
imagination.
freedom,
Well, I'm in higher education because of the transformation. I love the transformational power of education, and that kind of experience might change that individual.
Mm.
And hopefully there'll be a place for them when they get out.
Yeah, it was one of the things that came out of that experience for me, the actual production of this, is when we had it in the gallery. We also had some razor wire with a chain link fence as a small piece off to the side that you could write letters to yourself wrapped around the fence. And it was just kind of a contract with yourself in some way. But the ex-inmates that came to see this were very disturbed by the fence and the wire, because the fence and the wire to them, when they were in, represented my humanity has been reduced to such a degree that if I crossed that line, they'd have the right to kill me. And there was something very dehumanizing about it for them. It was very hard for them to take. It was very triggering.
Symbols are very powerful.
Yeah.
You know? Doesn't mean you did the wrong thing, just...
Yeah, I mean, it was a complete ignorance situation. Like, oh wow, I didn't know your experience would have left you there.
When I was just writing without illustration, and my goal was to keep people engaged, make an impact. The enemy wasn't other writers; it was sleep. Like you want people who are interfacing with your creativity to react. Right. So if you did that, then you succeed. Maybe the reaction isn't what you wanted, but you can't be in everybody's head.
Yeah, no, it was oddly, we just didn't understand the depth and the power that it had when we created it. We just kind of thought like, oh, we didn't do it for this. I think it would be nice. And then to see the result, to watch people interact with it was far more profound than I ever would have thought. There was more than we conceptualized.
I mean, extreme situations create extreme, back to documentary films. I remember watching, films of mental institutions or highly destructive family. It's fascinating. You watch it to get comfortable so you can be educated, but you're distanced from it because the medium isn't putting you in there. But it's educational. At least you're helping people understand something that they will never understand and may run away from. So it is. So that's where we are.
Let's wind this up with. Okay. Have you ever watched Listening to Kenny G?
No.
Oh man.
Okay.
Your assignment that no one's probably said this to you in probably 50 years or however long.
Okay.
But the documentary Listening to Kenny G, I think it's on HBO. The woman who did it is insanely talented.
Who is Kenny G?
Listening to Kenny G.
No, I mean, who is that person?
He is the guy responsible for soft jazz.
Okay.
Smooth jazz, maybe.
Okay.
He is that guy from the 90s
right.
with the long curly hair.
Right.
You know.
Interesting.
And he's an incredibly interesting character. He knows his value. He knows his perception. It's like, if I cut my hair, my career's over. I'm not trying to fake this.
Right.
It's really, really interesting. But they go in the documentary. They go strong with all the critics who are like, this is not jazz. This is not a call and response. This is, and then they have all the fans like, well, we love it.
Right.
Doesn't that stand for anything? And it's a really good encapsulation of the whole thing with him in the middle, bearing both.
Yeah, well, and they use the technique we talked about, the inoculating people, so they trust that you're not just preaching from one side. You understand that documentary filmmakers did that on purpose, so people would be open to this perspective.
The woman that did this, insanely talented with forming and presenting that story of reality. It's the one of kind of, look at that. See,
yeah, okay.
I'm not lying. Yeah.
No, that's funny. Somebody else was talking to me, and when the goosebump moment came, said, "See," so that just integrates our kind of Western persona with our holistic body. So sometimes you can't but react to something despite what your brain says.
Yeah. No, there's usually in every podcast, if it's someone that is helping me realize something or I'm sharing something important, I can immediately feel.
Yeah.
Oh, goosebumps. This is one of those.
Well, that's good. And when you stop feeling it, you should do something else, right? No, it's important to to be in the moment with your work, and sometimes when you do something a lot, you're not.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Now you're opening up another can of worms that I'd love to talk about, but we don't want to take the whole day.
Well, so are we concluded?
Oh, we can cut whenever, but I'm trying to be respectful of your day.
Oh, yeah. So just tell me what the process is, because I'm not quite sure where the podcast and the article.
So from here, Tim will figure out how to wrap this up so it doesn't get part of the conversation. Hopefully we'll have to at the end. But we basically just air this uncut. It's just a conversation between people exploring,
Right.
And this, Maine Home Design is probably going to ask you to write on a specific concept. And this is essentially attached to that as a small
like the behind the scenes.
Like if you want to hear more from Laura.
Right.
And this was mostly, actually, I came up with the concept for this article probably close to 20 years ago and pitched it to Bruce Morelli from Elliott & Elliott, Morelli's architect back in the day. Just as an idea of how to get the concept of design and creativity into the minds of the potential clients. More so, dumb it down a bit to feed it.
Right.
And it's turned into, I realized how much I enjoy these one-on-one conversations that for someone who's creative and introverted to try and go to a social event and get this level of introspection from someone who's had just an immense amount of experience that they can share is so valuable, but it's also a great marketing tool. So I kind of brought this together and pitched it to Maine Home Design when they went through their rebranding, we'll call it.
Reorg,
and said, hey, I'd like to work with you guys again.
Oh, great.
And how about we do this podcast every time we do this article, and then it helps.
No, that's great. When I was a reporter, I interviewed Yo-Yo Ma. Really? He's a cello
for like the last 2 years.
Oh, that's great.
He actually goes upstairs and he just plays.
So at the end of the interview, kind of at this moment, I, got the courage to say, well, if you weren't the world's greatest cellist, what would you want to do? And he said, I really think musicians can inspire peace on earth. And I was like, well, we could get all these musicians on one stage and without a conductor, and they could model collaboration, making beautiful work, improv. So he said, that's a great idea. So that was 10 years later, he called me. I was at Brown University at the time. When I interviewed him, I was at Harvard Magazine. He said, remember the idea? Of course I didn't. What idea? I had a few since then, but he said, well, I think I have funding to do this thing. Would you be the, make it happen? And I was like, well, I'm not a classical music person. I'm more a visual arts person. He said, well, I know enough. Trust me that I'll do the music.
I'll handle that.
And I said, well, I can make this happen if we have a little bit of money. And he found money from the World Bank. Jim Wolfison at the time, who is an amateur cellist, was head of World Bank, and the Dalai Lama was going to give us money, and the Aga Khan. So it was like Eastern religion and Muslim religion and U.S. World Bank. And I thought, well, this is great. So I quit my job. I became executive director of this Silk Road. And then like 3 months into it, the board said the money didn't come from.
Thanks for quitting your job.
But I thought, well, it could be fast, but I still have an opportunity to try something. And then my part of it, 12 years, we were on the road together with these incredible musicians. And Yo-Yo's point was that Western music didn't start in Italy. All these countries have incredible traditions. And he picked the amazing musicians. And then I wrote the kind of why we're doing it, how it's done, with the hope that when people heard all this, they would get rid of some prejudices and think, well, maybe I don't like Iran, but I love this Comanche, and I want to know more about it. So we had a great time traveling the world, and I learned how to raise money, which I hadn't done before. It's the same, that expression, if you only have a hammer, every problem's a nail. So my hammer is storytelling. I'm just like, well, if I tell you the story, maybe you'll support us too.
Yeah.
which they did. So,
Yeah, my father-in-law went fundraising for schools.
yeah, well, if you're
while.
passionate about, I tell everybody, you will be a fundraiser at one point because you'll be passionate about something, and then you'll want other people to help you, and then you could be passionate about this and raise money for it. Wouldn't take much, I can tell you. But then you might not want to do that, but you could.
Yeah. I wonder why there's that dynamic that you'll need a fundraiser, because the person actually creating the art or the thing that is being funded typically isn't necessarily
Well, that's not
the best
there, and
thing.
that's not, and like, it wasn't Yo-Yo's talent. People wanted to be close to him, but I had to do the website and the connection and the cocktail parties and the donors and figure out what people wanted, and then he would come in with me to say thank you.
Right.
But that's not what he knew how to make beautiful music. Well, if you don't have the most important thing, you're not going to succeed.
Right.
Like, I don't know what this looks like, but it has to be of value that's perceived by more than you and your mother and your wife.
Right.
And then, if it is, then people do generally, like, I think raising money for Maine College of Art and Design is like, I want to do that. I know artists are important. I know we're the only art school in the whole state. Like, this is really doing something tremendously important for a place that prides itself on the kind of progressive things we're talking about. So for me, this is my creativity, is making it all work.
Right.
For someone else, for Honor Mac, it's painting this thing that I am so glad she's doing, because she's showing students how to do what they can do.
Right. Well, I so appreciate you taking the time to come down here and fiddle with the parking issues. And
that's all right.
get all the way
I
down
don't.
here.
Nobody wants their car towed. On the
That's never
bakery moment, there's like a plain croissant, I think, chocolate and strawberry. Have you ever heard of Belleville?
Mhm.
It's in Montreux Hill, right in my neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
And the guy is from France, and he, I think, fell in love with a Mainer. So he probably spends 4 hours every morning shellacking flour with butter to make. And you're probably gluten-free or something. Are you
nailed
gluten-free?
it, yeah.
Did I
I
just?
was just gonna kindly not mention that and
Are
say
you?
I'm gonna. Yeah.
Oh, are you also gluten-free?
Then if he wasn't editing another podcast.
Oh, all right. Well, then good. And we'll bring it home. I bet maybe somebody
Right.
isn't.
Well, all right. Sorry. One more second.
Oh,
Let
yeah.
me,
Sorry, I have like an internal
yeah.
calendar in my head.
Laura Freid.
Yes.
Right. Thank you so much for coming down. Really do appreciate it. It's really an opportunity to get a view behind the curtain, someone whose mind who's responsible for such an important thing in the state. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for putting up with parking issues and everything else around here. And I really value MECA&D being in the state, and I'd love to have anyone else who could, because interviewing artists is so deeply interesting to me because of that. So anyone else you know who'd love to talk about anything to do with the creative process, art, or creativity, and they wanted just to come and talk to some guy who will wander all over the place.
That's great. That's great. And thank you, Trent. I enjoy sharing stories and talking about what we do, and particularly making people aware of how important the artist is, the designer is in our world. And I think it's becoming more and more important as so much is mediated through technology now. If you don't have someone on your side who sees the world, you're not going to be able to share it.
Yeah, I think the people coming out of MECA are going to be starting to be scooped up far more than they would have in the last quarter century.
Oh yeah, it's a totally different world. Most of the students start working for money while they're still students, because you can't believe the amount of hours you could, but the amount of hours you need. We just changed the major so that students start in their sophomore year, because they can't learn what they need to learn in the 2 years. The reason we resisted was we also know there are kids, they're young, and we want them to land where their passion is, and sometimes they start saying, I want to do this, and then discover a new medium, and we don't want them to not discover it. So they have a lot. We throw a lot at them the first year because some of them never saw the tools that we have. So.
Cool. Well, you've got very important things to do the rest of your day.
Well, thank you
for coming down.